The desert sleeps beneath a veil of silver light. A wind moves slowly across the sands of Giza, brushing against the ancient stones that have stood longer than memory itself. Somewhere between those shifting dunes and the quiet echo of church bells, two worlds meet. The world of the Knights Templar, sworn to guard secrets of faith, and the world of the ancients, who carved their knowledge into monuments of impossible precision. Some say the Templars returned from the Holy Land with more than relics and gold. They carried a map, not of places, but of ideas, connecting the geometry of cathedrals to the mathematics of the pyramids, and the whispers of an even older order that built with sound, light, and measure. Others insist it is all myth, coincidence layered upon coincidence, yet the patterns persist, repeating like a forgotten language written in stone. What if the line between the builders of Giza and the keepers of Solomon's temple was never broken? What if the Templars were not searching for treasure, but for memory itself, something left behind long before our history began? This is Serene Myths, where we follow the quiet paths between belief and evidence, between faith and forgotten science. If you wish, you can like or subscribe, or tell us in the comments where and when you're listening tonight. Now, breathe softly and listen. The bells are beginning to toll in the distance, calling us back to the first vow, to the first flame, to the story that begins beneath a cross flag and the whispering sands of Acre. Night gathers like a velvet tide across the sands of Acre. In the slow-breathing dark, torches flicker against the limestone walls of a ruined chapel. There, beneath a tattered cross flag bleached by desert wind, the Knights Templar stand in silence. Their armour no longer gleams. It absorbs the faint firelight, dull silver becoming ghostly pewter. A low bell tolls from somewhere unseen, its sound rolling like distant thunder over the dunes. The air smells of salt and oil, of sweat and candle smoke. The men bow their heads and a chant begins. Ancient syllables, half Latin, half something older, a cadence that hums in the bones. Among them, one knight kneels apart, tracing a circle in the sand. In the circle's heart, he places a shard of stone, no bigger than his hand. Its surface is carved with lines too fine for medieval tools, geometry spiraling toward a vanishing point. It had been found, so the records whispered, in a chest retrieved from beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. They believed it to be a fragment of something not built by human hands. The fragment hums faintly when touched, as if remembering the pressure of an ancient sun. The knight crosses himself, uncertain whether the vibration comes from faith or fear. The Templars were not only warriors, they were bankers, engineers, sailors, and keepers of secrets. From Scotland to Jerusalem, they built churches aligned to invisible patterns, the same angles repeated as though tracing a map no one could read. Pilgrims came to them for protection. Kings came for loans. Scholars came for knowledge. But behind their red cross was another symbol, never shown on banners, a circle enclosing a triangle, carved on stones, found in crypts. They alone entered. Some said it was the mark of Solomon, others that it was older, belonging to an age before the flood. In their archives lay texts copied in languages unspoken for 2,000 years, carried across the Mediterranean after the fall of Alexandria. To most, they were knights. To a few, they were archivists of a forgotten world. The rituals of initiation were simple in gesture, but heavy in meaning. Candles extinguished one by one. Questions whispered about loyalty, about the truth hidden beneath scripture. They were asked not only if they believed in Christ, but if they could keep faith with an idea even older. That light survives darkness, and knowledge survives the burning of libraries. When they answered yes, a sword was laid across their shoulders, and they were bound to protect not just relics, but revelations. That is why their order grew so swiftly, why they were given powers rivaling kings. Their vaults beneath the Temple Mount were not mere storerooms. They dug deep into the hill, into layers where older chambers slept. Chroniclers of the 12th century record strange objects brought up at night. Stone jars filled with metallic dust, tablets etched with star charts, and fragments of a great pillar that some thought part of the original Temple of Solomon, others of something far older. When questioned, the Grand Master said only, "We keep what time would erase." To this day, no one knows what they truly found, for when the order fell, their inventories vanished. Some scholars believe the Templars discovered evidence of a pre-biblical civilization, one that understood geometry and astronomy to degrees later mirrored in Gothic cathedrals. The way light filters through those cathedrals at equinox, striking particular sigils on the floor. Those alignments were not random. Each church was a replica, a coded echo of a greater monument. The order's own architects referred to the silent pattern of stone, a design older than Rome, older than Egypt. Perhaps that is why, when they spoke of Jerusalem, they used not the Hebrew name, but a phrase from Coptic, the Gate of the Sun. The same phrase appears in translations of pyramid texts carved thousands of years earlier. It is as if the Templars saw in those stones a reflection of their creed, the union of heaven and earth through measure. Some accounts claim that when the Crusaders first reached Egypt, a small contingent of Templars made a pilgrimage beyond their mission routes. They rode south, following rumours told by Coptic monks of a pyramid that sings at night. Whether the tale was born of superstition or sound carried by the wind, no one can say, but the chronicles of a knight named Gérard de Villiers record their journey to Giza in the year 1150. He wrote of the great house of stone whose passages breathed air colder than any church crypt, and of a single chamber that rang like a bell when struck. He measured its angles with a brass astrolabe, finding them truer than any cathedral arch. In his diary appears a sketch of the interior: 4 walls, a narrow shaft, and a circle inscribed within a triangle, the same emblem found beneath the Temple Mount. Coincidence, perhaps, or remembrance. When the order was later accused of heresy, the church pointed to their secret rites and symbols, accusing them of worshipping idols, of kneeling before a head carved in alabaster. Some of these charges were inventions of politics, yet beneath the inventions lay fragments of reality. The Templars revered knowledge that predated Christianity. They spoke of wisdom kept by the ancients, of voices in stone and messages written in geometry. To them, heresy was merely history misremembered. What they called the Grail was not always a cup. It was, some whispered, a lineage or a code. Sang Real, the royal blood, became Sang Graal, the holy vessel. Both could mean the same: a transmission of divine pattern, whether through flesh or through measure. Imagine the scene now: a candlelit chamber under Acre, a knight placing that fragment of carved stone on an altar. The walls hum with chants, not loud but resonant, as if the air itself carries an echo from Giza. The man closes his eyes. For an instant he feels the same cold breath that Gérard once described inside the pyramid. The air of eternity, unmoving, older than wind. He does not know why it feels familiar, only that the pattern etched on the fragment matches the circle and triangle drawn upon his own ring. When he opens his eyes, dawn is brushing the edges of the sea. The bell tolls again, distant now, fading into the horizon. The order will fall within 2 centuries. Its members will be hunted, burned, scattered across Europe. Yet their secrets will not vanish. Some will pass into the Freemasons, others into the whispers of Renaissance scholars, and the fragment, the shard of unknown stone, will disappear, perhaps taken aboard a ship fleeing towards Scotland, or buried again beneath the shifting sands of Jerusalem, but the geometry remains, repeating through architecture, resurfacing in cathedrals, in pyramids, in the measurements of the earth itself. When one listens closely, the tolling of that Templar bell still seems to echo across centuries, carried by desert wind and memory. It rings not for death, but for continuity, for the bridge between faith and forgotten science, between knights and ancient engineers, between the chisel and the star. And if you stand quietly, long enough for the night to breathe against your skin, you might sense the rhythm hidden in that sound, the same rhythm that once guided hands of stonecutters under Egyptian suns, and that the Templars swore to protect in silence. The air cools, the sand glows pale. Somewhere in that vast stillness, an unseen bell marks the passing of another age, calling the listener toward the next secret buried in stone. The desert before dawn is a vast breath of silence. Pale light begins to rise over the horizon, brushing the edges of the Great Pyramid until the limestone seems to glow from within. At this hour, the wind moves gently through the plateau, whispering over sand that has swallowed centuries. From the Templar chronicles, one can almost see it. The same knight who once knelt beneath the cross flag, now standing upon the Giza plain, his cloak pulled close, his eyes fixed on that colossal geometry. He feels the pull of something older than empire, older even than scripture. Here, amid the stillness, the world feels suspended between stone and sky. The question that haunted him, and that would echo through the centuries after, is simple but unanswerable. Who truly built this mountain of stone? The textbooks of the modern world give a clear answer. Pharaoh Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, around 2560 BCE. They tell of 20 years of labour, of armies of skilled workers hauling 2 million blocks, of ramps and sledges, and the will of a divine monarch. It is a story that fits neatly between dynasties, sealed with a royal cartouche, and the authority of Egyptology. Yet standing before the pyramid itself, the tale feels too light for its weight. The surfaces are too perfect, the alignments too precise, the silence too articulate. Every stone seems to murmur another version of history, one not easily contained by a single king's ambition. In the 12th century, long before modern archaeology, crusaders and scholars alike accepted the pyramid's mystery as self-evident. The chronicler Usama ibn Munkidh described them as houses of the wise, not tombs but repositories of knowledge built before the flood. The Templar emissaries who visited Egypt recorded similar impressions. They measured the shadow of the Great Pyramid at noon and found its ratio to the base mirrored proportions in their own cathedral plans. The coincidence unsettled them. Could it be that the sacred geometry of Christian architecture echoed something preserved in these desert stones? Their notes speak of awe, but also of fear, the kind that comes from realizing one's faith may be part of a story far older than believed. Centuries later, when scholars began peeling back the sands with science instead of scripture, the mystery deepened rather than resolved. The official chronicle of Khufu's pyramid rests on a slender thread, a painted name found high within hidden chambers. According to conventional history, that red cartouche, Khufu's royal mark, was the proof that crowned the theory. But beneath that single sign lies a quiet unease. The earliest written accounts of construction come not from the age of Khufu, but from Herodotus, 2,000 years afterward. The Greek historian admitted he merely retold what priests in Memphis had told him. Thus, the foundation of the Khufu narrative stands upon words, not stones. The Templar historians who survived into the Renaissance often noted this contradiction. In marginalia of old codices, written in Latin cramped as if hiding from fire, They copied phrases from Herodotus and added their own. If priests could misremember 2,000 years, what then of us? For them, history was a hall of mirrors. Truth survived only in geometry. The pyramid's angles did not change with opinion. They existed, constant, incorruptible. To understand who built it, one must listen to its measure rather than its myth. Inside, the air turns cold, dry as parchment. The tunnels descend in straight precision, meeting at exact points of balance. No hieroglyphs adorn these walls, no prayers, no depictions of gods receiving offerings. This absence unsettles the modern visitor as much as it once disturbed the medieval pilgrim. Tombs elsewhere in Egypt overflow with colour and narrative. Yet here, in the supposed resting place of the greatest pharaoh, there is only silence. Some interpret that silence as humility before eternity, others as evidence that the structure was never meant for burial at all. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber bears no body, no inscription. It could be a coffin or a container of another kind. The Templar record of Gérard de Villiers mentioned the same chamber, describing it as a vault that hums. He wrote that when struck, the granite coffer responded like a bell, producing tones that lingered in the air. The sound was not imagined. Modern explorers hear it too. It is as though the entire monument is tuned, the stone itself an instrument resonating with the earth. Such precision seems less like labour and more like language. Perhaps, the Templar mused, the builders meant to communicate not with gods, but with time itself, sending a message forward through vibration and proportion. And yet, no matter how much science or faith peers into these depths, the evidence for Khufu remains curiously thin. Inscriptions naming him appear only in that small upper chamber, discovered in the 19th century by Colonel Howard Vyse, a discovery whose authenticity, as we shall later see, became one of archaeology's most delicate controversies. Apart from that, the monument refuses identification. Reliefs from Khufu's reign show him in temples and quarries, but none depict the construction of this pyramid. Administrative papyri found nearby speak of repairs, not creation. If the Great Pyramid was truly built by his hand, history forgot to leave a trail of dust behind it. In the Templar imagination, such erasure was not accidental. They believed ancient monarchs often claimed what they did not build, erasing older marks to inscribe their own. To the Knights, that act was both political and spiritual, a way of conquering time. If Khufu did inherit a structure already ancient, then Egypt's chronology folds inward like papyrus scorched by fire, each dynasty writing over the ashes of the one before. The Great Pyramid might thus be a palimpsest of civilizations, the bones of one world clothed in the symbols of another. To touch its stone is to touch a history overwritten but not erased. Dawn climbs higher, turning the pyramid gold. Pilgrims and tourists will soon arrive, their footsteps scattering echoes along the causeway. But in this suspended hour between night and day, the monument seems alive. Its shadow points not north or west, but inward, toward a centre no compass can find. Perhaps that is where the truth sleeps, in the still point between faith and evidence, between what the Templars guarded and what the desert keeps. For every inscription there is an erasure, and for every certainty a silence. The pyramid stands because silence endures longer than argument. The knight watches the light spill over the capstone. He imagines that, within its angles, the same mathematics that shapes cathedral arches and planetary orbits breathes quietly. The connection between his order and this monument feels less like coincidence, more like inheritance. Somewhere deep beneath the structure, beneath chambers still sealed by stone, he senses a presence, neither divine nor human, but the hum of measure itself, the whisper of intention carved in stone. Perhaps this is why his brethren swore to guard knowledge rather than creed. Because in the face of such timeless precision, words become frail, the wind rises again, carrying the first sounds of morning from the river. The knight turns away, his cloak gathering sand around his boots. Behind him, the Great Pyramid glows like an ember caught between worlds. The bell that once tolled in Acre seems to echo faintly in his memory. Its tone blends with the desert wind, forming a single note that fades into sunlight. The question remains, who built this house of stone? But now it feels less like doubt and more like invitation, as if the monument itself were waiting for an answer older than language, older even than faith. The year was 1837, and the air inside the Great Pyramid hung thick with the scent of sweat, dust, and gunpowder. Colonel Howard Vyse, a British officer turned self-styled archaeologist, stood before a narrow shaft cut into granite, his lantern trembling in one hand. The flickering flame threw uneasy light over rough walls, illuminating the scars of forced entry. He had spent weeks blasting through sealed stones, deaf to the pleas of those who begged him to wait for permission from Cairo. Vyse was chasing a prize that had eluded centuries of explorers, proof that the pyramid truly belonged to Khufu. The crack of explosives echoed like thunder through corridors that had slept undisturbed since the dawn of recorded time. When the dust cleared, what he found seemed to vindicate the textbooks before they were even written. A handful of red markings painted upon the ceiling blocks of the newly opened chamber. They spelled the royal name Khufu, or so it appeared. Those crude signs would later be hailed as one of the most decisive discoveries in Egyptology. They were photographed, copied, and printed in learned journals as final proof that the pyramid was indeed the tomb of the 4th dynasty pharaoh. Vyse's name entered history as the man who unlocked a mystery. Yet, even as he claimed victory, questions began to whisper among the few who had seen the markings with their own eyes. The paint was bright, almost too bright. The symbols overlapped chisel marks from the blasting itself. Some were oddly shaped, their proportions inconsistent with other hieroglyphs of the Old Kingdom. And in one corner, beneath a faint layer of red pigment, a fine black smudge curved like a stray bristle stroke. The unmistakable trace of a modern brush. Decades later, when scholars examined Vyse's field notes and letters, inconsistencies multiplied. His assistants had reported the chambers empty, their surfaces bare, until the colonel returned alone and re-entered them by night. The next morning, the cartouches appeared. A rival engineer named Hill accused him openly of forgery. Vyse silenced the rumours through status and money, but the accusation never died. Chemical analysis performed in the 20th century revealed that the red pigment contained trace elements of mercury and lead, materials common in Victorian paint but rare in ancient Egyptian mixtures. To some researchers, the evidence was circumstantial. To others, it was the sound of history cracking open like stone under powder. If Vyse did indeed paint those names, the motive was not difficult to imagine. The Great Pyramid had yielded nothing. No treasures, no mummy, no inscriptions. To justify the enormous cost of his expedition, without proof, he would return to England empty-handed, his reputation ruined. The temptation to create evidence might have been irresistible. A single royal name could secure his legacy, and so it did. But what if, in securing his place, he also rewrote ours? What if those red letters were not the echo of a pharaoh's hand, but of a 19th century brush, writing over an older silence? Among the Templars' surviving manuscripts, copied long before Vyse's time, there appears an eerie anticipation of this very deceit. One parchment describes false seals placed upon true stones that the ignorant might rest content. The phrase might refer to any number of medieval relics, but some historians suspect it was prophetic. The Templars believed that true knowledge must always be veiled, lest the unready misuse it. Perhaps the pyramid's own secret was thus protected, its builders leaving no names, no obvious claim of authorship, trusting that pretenders would one day write their own and draw attention away from the deeper design. If that were true, Vice's forgery would not merely be fraud, it would be fulfillment. For modern Egyptology, the dilemma is uncomfortable. The entire narrative of Khufu's authorship leans heavily on the red paint evidence. Without it, the Great Pyramid stands once more anonymous. Excavations around Giza have unearthed worker villages, bakeries, and quarries, signs of vast labour, but they do not date the structure itself. They prove only that ancient Egyptians maintained and repaired it. The painted marks, fragile and inaccessible, remain the keystone of attribution. And yet, when one keystone trembles, the whole arch of history feels its weight shift. It is not just a question of who built a monument, it is a question of how we build belief. In the candlelit chambers of the 19th century, Vice's discoveries were hailed as revelation. In the electric glow of the 20th, they became riddles. Today, high-resolution imaging reveals micro-scratches beneath the pigment, suggesting the stone was cleaned or abraded before painting. The Khufu cartouche itself differs subtly from verified inscriptions elsewhere. A misplaced circle, a misaligned quail chick, a name written twice in different styles. Egyptologists argue that variations were common, that scribes made errors even in sacred names. Yet the pattern feels deliberate, like a cipher. Could Vice have copied from a fragment he barely understood? Or was he imitating something he had seen elsewhere? Perhaps an ancient mark glimpsed in the dark, misread and reproduced poorly. Either way, the uncertainty remains embedded in the stone like the faint echo of a mispronounced word. If the cartouche were indeed false, it would not be the first time history was rewritten to fit desire. From the Library of Alexandria to medieval cathedrals, knowledge has often been shaped by the hands that guard it. The Templars themselves understood this duality. Their archives held maps where coastlines were drawn, not as they were, but as they should be, guiding the faithful toward allegory rather than geography. Perhaps the pyramid's true authors chose the same approach, constructing a monument not to be explained, but to be endured, a riddle of proportion left to challenge every age. To mislabel such a monument would be easy, to comprehend it, impossible. In this way, the Great Pyramid becomes less a tomb and more a mirror. Each century projects its own certainty upon its surface. For the pharaohs, it was divine lineage. For Vice, imperial triumph. For the Templars, sacred geometry. For us, perhaps, an early echo of science itself. The stones remain unmoved, reflecting belief like sunlight off sand. The British officer's red paint may one day flake away, but the questions it obscured will persist. Who carved such precision with primitive tools? Why align the structure to the true north with accuracy beyond that of a compass? And what purpose demanded chambers placed so high, sealed from all human reach? As twilight returns to Giza, the pyramid absorbs the day's heat and releases it slowly, a giant lung exhaling centuries. Somewhere within its granite ribs, the red marks of Vice sleep in shadow, untouched by air, perhaps by truth. The lantern light that first revealed them has long since gone out, yet the controversy burns brighter than ever. Tourists walk beneath the stars, unaware that a few brush strokes, painted nearly 200 years ago, continue to shape everything we believe about the ancient world. Imagine now that a Templar scholar, centuries before Vice, dreamt of this very moment. In his vision, a man in foreign uniform breaks into a sacred chamber, raises a torch, and mistakes invention for discovery. The scholar writes in his journal, "Beware the keeper, who cannot read the door he opens. The prophecy fades in ink, yet its meaning lingers. Truth, like light, can dazzle as easily as it can illuminate. Outside, the desert wind carries a sound like breathing, the soft sigh of sand settling against stone. The night deepens, swallowing the last gleam of the day. Beneath that darkness lies a puzzle: paint, stone, and silence, each layer waiting for another to peel it back. The pyramid's face catches the faint reflection of the stars, as though recording their positions for another epoch to decode. And far away, beyond the dunes, a single church bell tolls across the centuries, echoing the Templar's vow. Guard the secret, even from those who seek it most. The bell's fading note draws the listener inward, toward the next veil waiting to be lifted beneath the weight of time. Morning has already washed the plateau with a veil of gold when the first voices of tourists begin to echo near the base of the Great Pyramid. Guides shout names in half a dozen languages, camera shutters click like insects, and buses hiss under the sun. To most who stand here, the monument is an open and shut case, a colossal tomb built by Khufu's command, a triumph of labour and divine kingship. The textbooks, museum plaques, and glossy documentaries agree. They point toward the red-painted cartouches discovered by Colonel Weiss as final proof, the cornerstone of the Khufu narrative. Yet beneath that agreement lies a tremor, faint but persistent. What if the very foundation of that belief stands not on bedrock, but on sand? Inside the archives of the Cairo Museum, where light falls dim and dust motes float like ancient ghosts, the curators keep fragments from what they call the Builder's City. These ruins stretch along the edge of the plateau, and to the untrained eye, they appear to tell a simple story. A settlement of workers who constructed the pyramid. Mud brick houses line narrow alleys, ovens and workshops cluster near the river. There are skeletons of oxen and fish, pots still blackened with soot, bits of copper chisels worn thin. The site looks convincingly like a labour camp frozen in time. For decades, this has served as Exhibit A in the proof that Egyptian citizens, not slaves, built the pyramid in organised teams. It is the evidence used to argue against any foreign or ancient influence. But when archaeologists studied the layers of debris with radiocarbon dating, an unexpected pattern emerged. The earliest habitation predates the supposed 20-year construction window by decades, perhaps centuries. Later levels show traces of rebuilding, refilling, even the remains of bread ovens used long after the pyramid's completion. Rather than a bustling construction camp, the site may have been a permanent maintenance settlement, a community of priests, masons, and caretakers who cleaned, repaired, and replastered the surrounding temples through multiple dynasties. The people who lived there might have maintained a monument already old, not built a new one. It is a small distinction, but one that changes everything. Still, defenders of orthodoxy respond quickly. Such repairs would be expected for any royal monument. The pyramid's alignment with Khufu's cartouche remains decisive. Yet, as every historian knows, attribution by inscription can deceive. Names can be added, replaced, or usurped. The pharaohs themselves practiced this with zeal, chiseling away the signatures of predecessors to claim eternal authorship. One may imagine Khufu's artisans re-engraving earlier stones, stamping their king's seal upon a legacy already ancient, turning stewardship into ownership. The concept is not alien to Egyptian theology. To name something is to give it life, even if that life was borrowed. Among the walls of the pyramid field lie dozens of smaller mastabas belonging to nobles and overseers of Khufu's reign. Their hieroglyphs are vibrant, carved with precision, telling stories of rations and labour quotas, of the bread and beer that fueled the workforce. Yet nowhere do they describe the act of building the Great Pyramid itself. Instead, they speak of service to the king, of devotion, of rituals performed near the horizon of Khufu, a phrase that can mean both a physical place and a metaphysical state. It is possible then that these officials served a cult of restoration, not of creation. The horizon may have referred to a monument reclaimed, its name rewritten as a sign of divine continuity. The Templars, in their own coded writings, often mused about the fragility of such truths. One tract attributed to Hugo de Payens warned, "When the world forgets who built the altar, another will place his name upon it." To the Knights, history was less a sequence of facts than a succession of custodians. They believed knowledge to be cyclical. Civilizations rise, forget, and rediscover what had already been known. In their philosophy, Khufu may have been one such rediscoverer, a monarch who reawakened an older mystery, wrapped it in the symbols of his time, and called it his own. The notion aligns uncannily with archaeological hints of repairs and refurbishments on the pyramid's surface long after its initial completion. Opposing voices in modern scholarship argue otherwise. They point to the workman's graffiti found in other structures of the same era, to the consistent quarry marks at the base, to the administrative papyri discovered at Wadi al-Jarf that mention Khufu's port officials delivering limestone from Tura. These documents, they insist, tie the pharaoh directly to the pyramid's building operations. But even this evidence, when examined closely, reveals complexity. The papyri speak of finishing the casing and transporting white stone for the horizon of Khufu. Finishing is not creating. Casing is the outer skin, not the skeleton. It could describe the refurbishing of an older core with fresh limestone, beautifying an ancient relic for the age of a new king. The words themselves are ambiguous, like all records viewed through millennia of translation. Meanwhile, geological studies have mapped subtle differences between the pyramid's lower and upper stones. The foundation blocks show signs of erosion inconsistent with those higher up. Some bear marine fossils long eroded by rain. Others, sharp edges untouched by weathering. This suggests that portions of the structure have stood exposed far longer than others, as though built or refaced in phases. The deeper one looks, the older the story becomes. Yet official timelines remain fixed, for rewriting chronology is a dangerous business. It undermines not just Egypt's narrative, but humanity's sense of progress. To the Templar chroniclers, such danger was familiar. They too had faced councils unwilling to reopen closed doctrines. The parallel is almost poetic. Both priesthoods, ancient and modern, guarded their truths through authority. Yet truth has a way of breathing through cracks. Even now, as satellite scans and thermal imaging reveal hidden voids within the pyramid, we glimpse how much still lies concealed. Each new discovery adds questions rather than answers. The more instruments we point at the monument, the less it resembles a mere tomb. The Knight of Acre, whose story threads through these centuries like a shadow, might stand now at the edge of modernity, watching the scholars debate. He would recognize the same pattern, the urge to fix certainty where mystery thrives. To him, both the colonel's paint and the professor's carbon date are forms of faith. The pyramid requires neither defense nor apology. It endures because it defies conclusion. Its purpose may have changed through the ages, but its silence remains constant. As the afternoon sun burns white over the desert, the stones glow like embers cooling after a cosmic forge. The tour buses depart, leaving a hush that feels as ancient as the structure itself. In that silence, one can almost hear the slow pulse of the earth beneath, steady, indifferent, older than any name painted or chiseled upon its face. Perhaps the Templars were right to see the pyramid not as a monument to a king, but as a relic of an idea. That civilization is a custodian of mysteries too vast for ownership. Whether Khufu built it or merely claimed it, the truth no longer belongs to him. It belongs to the stone. The wind gathers, lifting a small spiral of sand that dances across the plateau before vanishing. Beyond the ridge, the faint shimmer of the Nile catches the dying sun. A ribbon of light threading through shadow. The day exhales, and the pyramid stands alone again, keeper of its own silence. The knight's imagined footsteps fade into that golden dust, leaving behind a question that hums softly in the cooling air. If every age writes its name upon the past, who will write ours? The thought lingers, tender and unresolved, as the horizon begins to blur into twilight, and the mind drifts toward the deeper chambers of what still waits to be found. Evening falls softly over the Giza plateau, and with it comes a quiet that belongs only to the desert. The tourists are gone, their footsteps swallowed by sand and distance. The last camel driver hums a tune as he descends toward the river, leaving behind the vast expanse of stone and shadow. The Great Pyramid looms in silence, its edges fading into dusk, its slopes drinking the last of the sun. It is in this hush, when the heat dissolves and the first stars appear, that the oldest clues become visible, not in writing or relic, but in the skin of the stone itself. For here, under the softened light of evening, the walls of the enclosure surrounding the Sphinx and the lower courses of the pyramid show a language written not by human hands, but by rain. The geologists who first studied those marks expected to see the signature of desert wind, horizontal grooves, the steady abrasion of centuries of sand. Yet what they found astonished them. Deep vertical fissures running down the limestone walls, channels smoothed as if by falling water. The pattern was unmistakable. These were not the scars of wind, but the wash of ancient storms. The type of erosion observed could only have been carved by sustained rainfall, heavy and persistent, over long periods of time. Such weather has not touched Giza for at least 8,000 years, perhaps more. If the Sphinx and the pyramid's foundation were already standing when that rain fell, then their true age drifts far beyond the horizon of Khufu's world. The discovery, first advanced by geologist Robert Schoch in the late 20th century, ignited a quiet tempest in academia. To suggest that part of the complex predates dynastic Egypt by millennia was to challenge not merely a timeline, but an entire worldview. Egyptology, built upon centuries of text and tradition, met geology head-on, and the resulting debate still vibrates like heat above the desert floor. On one side stand those who argue that the weathering could be explained by groundwater or ancient floods from the Nile. On the other, those who insist the marks tell of a forgotten climate, a wetter epoch when this land bloomed with life long before the pharaohs. Between them lies a silence no argument can fill, the silence of stone, patient, impassive, older than both disciplines. Imagine standing before the Sphinx in that half-light. The air tastes of dust and cooling stone. The face, eroded and enigmatic, watches the horizon where the sun has just slipped away. Its expression, once sharp, now blurs into a softness almost human, almost sorrowful. Beneath the gaze, the enclosure walls rise like frozen waves, carved by time's own tide. To run one's hand along them is to feel the pulse of an age when the sky itself wept upon these rocks. The Templar chronicles spoke of such a time in allegory, a deluge that did not end the world, but washed it clean of memory. In one preserved scroll, a monk knight describes a vision of the lions of stone drinking rain that no longer falls. Centuries before the language of geology, he sensed what the rocks would one day reveal. The idea that the Sphinx and the pyramid's base are remnants of a pre-dynastic civilization is more than a romantic hypothesis. Beneath the pores of the Sphinx, seismic surveys have detected cavities, rectangular voids, regular in shape, as though carved intentionally. No known burial or temple from Khufu's age fits that pattern. Local legends call it the Hall of Records, a chamber said to hold the wisdom of a civilization erased by flood. The Templars, who gathered whispers of such places during their sojourn in the East, referred to it cryptically as Cella Solis, the chamber of the sun. Whether fact or metaphor, the name carries resonance. The idea that within the earth sleeps the record of a sunken dawn, the blueprint of human beginnings. The geological findings extend beyond Giza. Across the plateau, ancient quarry walls display the same vertical runnels, as if all the stone had once stood beneath torrential skies. Core samples taken from deeper strata reveal microfossils of plants that require a humid climate to thrive. The Sahara we know, a kingdom of dust and wind, was once a landscape of rivers and lakes. The implications ripple outward. If these monuments were born in such a world, they may be survivors of an age when Egypt was not a desert but a garden. And if they were already ancient by the time Khufu ruled, then every subsequent dynasty built its myths upon borrowed foundations, inheriting not just stone, but amnesia. Skeptics answer with data of their own. They argue that the rain erosion could date only a few thousand years earlier, not 10. They cite the possibility of microclimates, of runoff channels formed by brief wet periods. They note that the pyramid's casing stones, now mostly gone, might once have shielded lower blocks from such effects. Yet none of these explanations account for the depth of weathering in the Sphinx's enclosure, or for the contrast between untouched desert monuments nearby and the water-scarred lion of stone. The debate remains unresolved, but the stones remain eloquent. They do not shout. They whisper, repeating the same story through texture and shadow. The Templars would have understood such ambiguity. In their philosophy, truth was not a single sword stroke, but the harmony of opposing edges. To them, the rain marks would have been not contradictions, but signatures, proof that divine design speaks through paradox. A structure can belong to two ages at once, conceived by ancients, claimed by successors. A temple can be both tomb and telescope. Perhaps that is why, in their secret manuscripts, they drew diagrams of pyramids with waterlines traced across their bases, labeling them Flumen Temporis, the river of time. In the margins they wrote, "The oldest marks are not the first to be seen. When night deepens, the desert cools. The wind sighs through the hollow sockets of the Sphinx, producing a tone low and mournful. Some claim that sound is illusion, wind caught in the limestone, but those who have stood there after midnight describe a resonance that feels deliberate, like a hymn without words. If one listens long enough, the vibration seems to match the rhythm of a human heartbeat, slow, patient, eternal. It is easy then to imagine the Templar Knight of Acre standing where you stand, his armour gleaming faintly under a rising moon, tracing the grooves in the wall with a gloved hand. He would not see weathering or erosion. He would see script, a message carved by the heavens themselves, written in the oldest language, time. He kneels, gathering a handful of sand dampened by the night air, letting it fall through his fingers. Each grain catches a fragment of starlight before vanishing into darkness. Perhaps, he thinks, this is what history truly is. A million pieces of truth slipping through our grasp, impossible to hold, yet luminous as they fall. The rain that once sculpted these stones may have ended ages ago, but its pattern endures, guiding those who listen toward remembrance. As the stars brighten, the pyramid behind him glows faintly, its angles tracing constellations that mirror its shape. Above it, Orion climbs, his belt pointing once again toward the horizon of Giza. Just as it did thousands of years ago, when the rain still fell. The alignment is too perfect to ignore, a celestial echo carved into stone. The knight closes his eyes, hearing the desert breathe. The sound of the wind merges with the faint memory of distant bells, the toll of his order calling across time. The air cools, and the stone beneath his hand feels alive, pulsing softly as if remembering the flood. In that moment between night and dream, the boundaries of era and faith blur, the Sphinx watches, the stars turn, and the rain that carved these walls seems to fall again, soundless, invisible, eternal. The desert remembers what history forgets, and as the night rises to leave, his shadow blends with the darkness stretching toward the river, where the ancient waters once flowed. The hush that follows carries the listener forward, deeper into the labyrinth of time, toward the next layer of mystery sleeping beneath the surface of the stone. The desert morning returns pale and windless, the light as thin as breath. A pair of ravens circle the plateau, black against the brightening sky before vanishing toward the river. The Great Pyramid lies silent beneath them, each block a page of stone in a chronicle still unread. For centuries, scholars have searched for ink to write upon it. Measurements, theories, dates. They have drilled, sampled, burned fragments into ash for the sake of certainty. Yet the more they measure, the more the monument resists. It is as if the stone itself refuses to confess. The story of its age has become not a revelation, but a paradox, a riddle of carbon, lime, and time. In 1984, a team of scientists led by Mark Lerner and Robert Wenker collected samples of mortar from various points along the pyramid's joints. Their goal was simple: apply the new precision of radiocarbon dating to the oldest structure on Earth. The process seems straightforward. Measure the ratio of decayed isotopes in organic material trapped within the ancient gypsum, compare it to modern baselines, and derive an age. But the results arrived like fragments of a broken clock. Some samples dated to Khufu's reign as expected. Others were centuries older. A few, curiously, younger by almost 500 years. The graph looked less like a line of time than a heartbeat. Uneven, inexplicable. The pyramid, it seemed, refused to hold still. The scientists explained the anomaly as contamination. Bits of old wood, straw, or charcoal reused in mortar, skewing the results. They suggested that builders might have recycled material from older temples. Yet even this cautious explanation only deepened the mystery. If the workers drew upon debris already ancient in their time, what had those materials once been part of? And why, in some cases, did the dates stretch back nearly a millennium before Khufu's reign? When the tests were repeated in 1995, with more advanced calibration, the pattern remained. The Great Pyramid did not yield a single moment of creation. It whispered of many hands across many centuries, a monument perpetually renewed. Among the relics associated with these tests was one that stirred even greater wonder. A slender piece of cedar known as the Dixon relic. It had been discovered in 1872 by an engineer named Wayman Dixon, lodged within the narrow shafts of the Queen's Chamber, alongside a bronze hook and a small granite ball. The relic vanished soon afterward, misplaced among museum archives, only to resurface more than a century later in the University of Aberdeen. When subjected to radiocarbon dating in 2020, the fragment produced a date that shocked even the cautious, between 3340 and 3090 BCE, 5 to 8 centuries older than Khufu. The cedar, too ancient to fit the accepted timeline, forced historians to squint at their own certainties. Perhaps it was a piece of restoration, they reasoned, or wood carried from a family heirloom. Yet deep within the shaft where it had rested, sealed for millennia, It seemed more plausible that the cedar had been placed there when the pyramid itself was young, or younger than the desert, but older than kings. The Templars, had they known of such discoveries, would have smiled with quiet recognition. In their secret commentaries on sacred architecture, they wrote that true monuments resist the calendar. A cathedral, once consecrated, becomes an eternal organism. Its stones renewed, but its essence unchanged. Every age repairs the house of God, one scribe wrote, and every repair becomes a chapter of its making. To them, time was not linear, but circular, each epoch rebuilding what the last had begun. Perhaps the pyramid followed that same rhythm, each dynasty patching and perfecting a core whose origin had long slipped from memory. The builders of Khufu's age may not have been creators at all, but restorers following a blueprint handed down from an age of floods and forgotten stars. Still, science continued its pursuit. Another method, optically stimulated luminescence, OSL, was applied to sand and stone samples around the base. OSL measures the last time quartz grains were exposed to sunlight. Each exposure resets the atomic clock. When the readings came back, they spoke again in riddles. Some levels indicated exposure 6,000 years ago, others 3,000. The margin of error was a canyon. Once more, the Great Pyramid evaded confinement. It was less an artifact and more an argument between epochs. For Egyptology, the safest refuge lay in probability, that contamination and maintenance explained all. After all, temples throughout Egypt were repaired for millennia. Older material was often reused, yet the statistical spread of the data mocked that comfort. Too broad, too consistent to be chance, the pattern suggested something else. An enduring structure tended over vast ages, like a machine kept running by successive custodians. The idea is not foreign to Egyptian theology. Their word for a sacred monument, perka, means house of the ka, a vessel for spirit, endlessly rejuvenated. The pyramid, by that logic, was never finished. It was alive, absorbing and shedding layers of time. Far from Cairo, in the quiet halls of European monasteries, whispers of similar thinking survived. The Templar manuscripts speak of the pillars that count not years, monuments aligned not to dynasties, but to the movement of stars. They believe that when men lose memory of purpose, the earth itself preserves it in pattern. The carbon that confounds our instruments might be the residue of such cosmic bookkeeping, a record written in chemistry rather than ink. To test the age of the temple, wrote one night chronicler, is to test the patience of God. He might have been smiling. Meanwhile, deeper analysis of the mortar revealed microscopic air bubbles arranged in a fractal pattern. Some materials suggested heat beyond what simple kilns could achieve. A few theorists proposed that the Egyptians had mastered an early form of synthetic stone, reconstituting limestone into blocks through alchemical binding. If so, the pyramid was not merely quarried, it was poured, moulded, designed as a single resonant body. The notion was dismissed by purists but remains tantalizing. Even the Templars, with their fascination for sacred geometry, spoke of the living wall, a term that fits uncannily with the idea of engineered stone vibrating as one continuous shell. The contradictions pile like dunes. Radiocarbon too old, luminescence too young, erosion too deep. Yet in those contradictions, a pattern forms. The pyramid is not an event, but a continuum. It's building a conversation between ages. It began when the world was wet, continued when it was dry, and still continues in the questions we carve upon its face. To measure it is to measure humanity's longing for certainty and the futility of that longing. The Knights would have called it a temporal labyrinth, where every corridor returns to its beginning. As the afternoon wanes, The air cools again, and the desert hums with cicadas. In that hush, the pyramid glows a soft ochre, its edges blurring into haze. If one listens carefully, the wind that slides along its surfaces sounds like a whisper counting backwards, centuries folding upon themselves. The numbers fade, leaving only rhythm, like the ticking of a clock, with no hands. The scientist with his instruments, the knight with his prayer, the traveller with his question, all stand before the same silent enigma, all feel the same pull towards something immeasurable. A breath of wind stirs the dust at the pyramid's base, curling into eddies that vanish between the stones. Somewhere beneath those layers lies a fragment of cedar, darkened by time yet still aromatic, as if holding the scent of rain from a vanished world. The air grows cooler, and the sky shifts from gold to rose. The sun descends, touching the western horizon where the Nile gleams like molten glass. In that fading light, the pyramid seems less a monument than a memory, half in this world, half in the next. The question of its age dissolves into the larger mystery of why it endures. As the shadows lengthen, the last warmth of day lingers upon the stone like a heartbeat. It fades slowly, steadily, leading the listener deeper into the story, toward the next chamber where questions of technique and impossible precision await beneath the gathering dusk. Twilight settles over Giza like a veil of copper, and the desert exhales its heat. The stones that blazed white all day now shimmer in muted rose, cooling beneath the breath of evening. In the hush, a shadow passes across the pyramid's face, the memory of movement, perhaps, or the ghost of labour imagined. For thousands of years, the question of how this mountain of precision rose from the plain has haunted both science and myth alike. Every generation, from ancient scribes to modern engineers, has conjured its own vision. Ramps stretching like scars across the sand, ropes creaking under the strain of granite, armies of labourers chanting to keep rhythm with the heartbeat of empire. And yet, no drawing, no experiment, no calculation has ever fully bridged the impossible between human hand and cosmic scale. The standard explanation begins with ramps, massive, monotonous ramps. The textbooks describe them as straight, sloping constructs of limestone debris extending outward for half a mile. With such a ramp, the story goes, teams of men could drag the blocks upward on sledges, pouring water to lubricate the sand beneath. But as soon as one sketches the plan to scale, absurdity seeps in. The ramp would require more stone than the pyramid itself. Its gradient, shallow enough to permit hauling, would have stretched across the Nile floodplain, consuming villages and fields. And even if it had existed, no trace remains. The desert, which preserves footprints from prehistory, holds not a whisper of such a monument of mud. Other minds propose spiral ramps wrapping around the pyramid's body, an ascending corkscrew of debris and sweat. This too falters under scrutiny. The turns would have concealed each face, making alignment impossible. The angles too steep for traction, the support structures absurdly fragile. Archaeologist Jean-Pierre Houdin offered a subtler idea: an internal ramp concealed within the pyramid itself, turning upward like a secret staircase. Computer simulations suggest it could work, yet no definitive tunnel has been found, only hints on thermal scans. The Great Pyramid, true to character, keeps its methods locked behind silence. In 1978, the Japanese television network Nippon organized a daring reenactment. They would build a small pyramid using only tools available to ancient Egyptians: copper chisels, wooden sledges, muscle, and faith. The desert swallowed their optimism within weeks. The copper dulled too quickly against granite. The ropes snapped. The blocks refused obedience. Even after introducing steel tools and modern cranes, their scaled model tilted and cracked. The crew stood sweating under the merciless sun, humbled. Their report concluded with a phrase both diplomatic and despairing. The method remains elusive. For the first time, cameras had captured the gap between imagination and reality. The Templars, who revered both faith and geometry, might have seen in this failure not embarrassment, but revelation. In their philosophy, true sacred architecture is an act of resonance rather than force. The stone must wish to move, one medieval mason wrote in a Templar notebook, and the builder must know its song. To them, matter responded to harmony, sound, proportion, rhythm. They believed ancient craftsmen possessed formulas that could alter weight, a marriage of acoustics and intention. Modern science dismisses such notions as alchemy, yet within the king's chamber, the theory seems almost tangible. Strike the granite coffer, and it hums at 432 hertz, the frequency that recurs in chants and tuning systems from Tibet to Chartres. The very scale that soothes the human nervous system is carved into the pyramid's flesh. Coincidence or echo? Some researchers note that the blocks fit with such precision, less than a millimetre between them, that air cannot pass through the seams. Without mortar, they interlock like gears. Achieving this with copper chisels defies reason. Microscopic studies of the granite cores found spiral grooves consistent with high-speed drilling, the kind produced by rotary motion far faster than hand tools could achieve. Engineer Christopher Dunn, studying these patterns, proposed that the ancient builders might have used mechanical methods powered by principles we no longer grasp. Vibration, resonance, perhaps even electromagnetic force harnessed from the earth itself. His ideas remain controversial, yet the evidence persists, precision measurable, method absent. The contradiction pulls like gravity. On one side stand the pragmatists, insisting that patience and manpower explain all. On the other, those who sense in the stone an intelligence lost to time. Between them, the pyramid stands unbothered, offering neither apology nor answer. The Templar chroniclers, if they could walk these corridors, would nod in recognition. In their cryptic texts, they describe tools that cut by sound and stones that yield to the name of God. These may be metaphors for faith or memories of techniques inherited from older ages. Either way, the idea survives that creation at its highest is not brute labour, but communion. A passage from the Liber Domus Caeli, attributed to a Templar scribe in the 12th century, speaks of machines that breathe, devices used by pre-flood builders to lift monoliths through the vibration of air. The same manuscript compares the Great Pyramid to an organ whose pipes reach heaven. When modern acousticians measured the interior frequencies of the Grand Gallery, they found harmonic nodes corresponding almost exactly to musical ratios, fourths, fifths, octaves. If such alignment was accidental, it is a grand one. The chamber behaves not like a tomb, but like an instrument, tuned to the voice of the planet. The idea aligns with ancient myths of the sounding stones, rocks that moved when sung to. Perhaps the builders understood something about resonance that science has yet to rediscover. Still, orthodoxy holds its ground. Egyptologists remind us that no ancient texts describe machines or levitation. They point to scenes of workers hauling statues, to copper tools discovered in quarries, to fragments of ramps near other pyramids. Their caution is warranted, yet their confidence feels incomplete. The experiment of 1978 stands as a ghostly refutation. Even with modern planning, they could not replicate a fraction of the precision. The pyramid's sides align with true north to within 3/60ths of a degree, a feat unmatched until the advent of laser surveying. Its base deviates by less than 2 centimetres across 230 metres. Such perfection hints not at improvisation, but at mastery. Whether that mastery belonged to Khufu's engineers or to someone far older, the stones alone remember. Perhaps then the method was neither purely mechanical nor mystical, but both. A synergy of intellect and intuition. Imagine builders who saw the world not as inert matter, but as living geometry. Every shape a reflection of cosmic order. To raise a block was to participate in harmony, not defy gravity. The Templars echoed this belief when designing their circular churches, patterned after the Holy Sepulchre and the very ratios of the pyramid itself. They called their craft opus divinum, divine work. To them, labour and liturgy were one. Maybe the ancient architects thought the same. Each placement of stone a syllable in a prayer that endures long after the language is forgotten. The night grows cooler. From the plateau, the city lights of Cairo flicker like a mirage of stars reversed upon the earth. The pyramid's vast silhouette divides heaven from sand, a horizon drawn by human will and mystery alike. A lone archaeologist switches off his flashlight. Standing motionless in the dark chamber where walls seem to breathe, he touches the stone and feels it vibrate faintly, as if echoing the pulse of the world. Outside, the desert wind murmurs across the plateau, a sound both ancient and new. The same voice that may once have guided hands, now vanished. The question of how lingers, suspended in that resonance, neither solved nor surrendered. And as the moon climbs, washing the limestone in silver, the air trembles ever so slightly, as if the monument itself were remembering the music of its making. Perhaps it was never built in the way we imagine. Perhaps it was sung into place, lifted by rhythm and purpose. Every block a note in an eternal hymn to the sky. The thought drifts like dust, rising with the wind, leading the listener onward toward what those precise shapes were meant to encode. A pattern of numbers and stars waiting to be heard rather than seen. Dawn arrives without fanfare, a pale wash of gold spilling over the desert's rim. The Great Pyramid stands as if carved from the very sunrise, its lines sharp, deliberate, unyielding. At this hour the air is still, the wind resting as though in reverence. The shadow of the monument falls long across the sand, a perfect triangle stretching into infinity. From above, the geometry seems impossibly precise, each side mirroring the others, each corner anchored to the cardinal directions with a fidelity that humbles modern instruments. It is not simply large, it is exact, a sculpture of mathematics so flawless that the more one studies it, the less it seems the work of human imperfection. Surveyors through the ages have measured this precision with disbelief. The pyramid's base, spanning 230 meters per side, deviates by less than 2 centimeters. A ratio of error smaller than that of most contemporary skyscrapers. Its 4 sides align almost perfectly with the true north, deviating by only 3/60ths of a degree. No compass of the ancient world could achieve such calibration. Even with modern tools, the alignment challenges replication. The builders did not orient by magnetism, but by the stars. The circumpolar constellations, those eternal sentinels that never set, served as their compass. Astronomers suspect they used the simultaneous transit of Kochab and Mizar, 2 points forming a line nearly perpendicular to the celestial pole around 2500 BCE. When those stars crossed the meridian, they marked true north with unerring precision. Yet when the same alignment is run backward through astronomical software, it suggests a date slightly older than Khufu's reign, around 2600 or even 2700 BCE, raising again that subtle echo of an earlier hand. From the pyramid's height to its base length emerges another secret, one encoded in ratio. The structure's perimeter divided by twice its height equals 3, 1416, an approximation of p to within thousandths. Whether coincidence or intention, This proportion would not be rediscovered by mathematics for another 3,000 years. Another relationship lies hidden in its slope angle, 50 Fwadster 51-1, corresponding to the golden ratio f. Such harmony implies an understanding of abstract geometry, of universal constants independent of measurement systems. Egyptologists often argue that these values are accidents of practical design, the slope chosen for stability, the ratio a byproduct of simple qubits. But the argument wilts against precision. Random chance rarely hums in tune with the universe's most sacred numbers. The Templars, inheritors of the belief that geometry was divine scripture, saw in such proportions a code of transcendence. To them, the circle and triangle symbolized heaven and earth, the infinite and the measured. Their churches, especially the round ones of Britain and France, echoed the pyramid's mathematical soul. Circular naves inscribed within square foundations, light entering from 4 directions, merging in a central column of air. A chronicler of the order once wrote, "To measure is to pray with the eyes." Standing beneath the pyramid's shadow, the knight would have understood that prayer immediately. Its dimensions are a hymn to balance, to the dialogue between chaos and control. Modern researchers have gone further, proposing that the pyramid encodes geophysical data. The mean radius of the Earth, its circumference, even the ratio between polar and equatorial lengths. When scaled up, the pyramid's height corresponds proportionally to the distance from the equator to the pole. Its base perimeter approximates the planet's circumference at a ratio of 1.43200, a number that mirrors the ancient system of celestial measure, dividing the sky into the same multiple. Coincidence again, perhaps, but the repetition of pattern across scale hints at deliberate design. The monument may thus serve as a stone model of the world, a terrestrial echo of cosmic architecture. Inside, the precision continues with eerie persistence. The King's Chamber dimensions yield harmonics that align with both lunar cycles and sound frequencies. The passageways intersect at exact right angles, their gradients corresponding to star declinations. Even the pyramid's missing capstone, the Ben, fits the ratios of F and P so perfectly that its absence seems intentional, as if inviting heaven to complete the geometry. Some see this void as metaphor, the physical manifestation of humanity's unending pursuit of perfection. The structure approaches divine proportion but stops just short, acknowledging that only the infinite can complete it. Yet skepticism persists, as it must. Mathematicians warn against confirmation bias. Measure enough numbers, and patterns will emerge. The human mind is a relentless pattern maker, hungry to find meaning even in coincidence. They remind us that ancient builders may have chosen dimensions for practical reasons, the slope needed for stability, the cubit as an arbitrary measure. But as physicist Livio Catullo Stecchini observed, coincidence cannot explain consistency. When dozens of unrelated ratios converge toward universal constants, the burden of proof shifts. The pyramid's design may be both practical and profound, where functionality becomes the expression of philosophy. The line between engineer and mystic blurs until they are one. The Templars would have understood that synthesis instinctively. In their manuscripts, they speak of the canon of proportion, a belief that God's architecture can be known through number and harmony. They mapped cathedrals using the same ratios found here, 3.4.5, triangles, golden sections, the geometry of planetary orbits. To them, each building was not a structure, but a resonator, aligning Earth's vibration with the divine. The pyramid, they believed, was the original cathedral, the blueprint from which all later temples drew. Whether they learned this from their excavations beneath the Temple Mount, or from whispered Coptic traditions, none can say. but the echo of that belief remains etched into their designs and their legends alike. One might imagine a Templar knight standing at the pyramid's base, tracing its slope with his gaze until it vanishes into the glowing sky. He senses a rhythm in its form, a silent music of angles. To him, the monument is not a riddle to be solved, but a psalm carved in stone. He recalls the words of his order's architect. The divine triangle is both key and lock. If he had a compass and straight edge, he would find within the pyramid's measurements the same diagrams that govern cathedral windows and spiral shells. Geometry, he would say, is not invention but memory. The universe remembering itself through shape. The modern mind, for all its tools, rarely pauses to feel that memory. Satellites scan the pyramid from orbit. Algorithms model every block. Yet none of them answer why the structure breathes with such coherence. A building so immense should overwhelm perception, yet it soothes instead. The eye rests upon its symmetry as the ear rests upon music in tune. This is what ancient architects, from Egypt to Chartres, pursued without naming. The quiet satisfaction of proportion, the emotional truth of number. In that sense, the pyramid is less a mystery than a mirror reflecting humanity's yearning for order amidst chaos. As the sun climbs higher, the shadow of the pyramid contracts, pulling inward like a pulse returning to its source. The air trembles faintly with heat. In that shimmer, the edges blur until the entire monument seems to dissolve into light, stone becoming geometry, geometry becoming pure thought. The knight, if he still lingers in memory, closes his eyes against the glare and hears the faint ringing of steel upon stone, the eternal rhythm of measure. Somewhere, far beneath, the chambers hum softly, echoing a mathematics older than time. The pyramid stands, perfect in its imperfection, a formula that breathes, a number that dreams. And as the horizon brightens, the golden ratio folds into the next mystery, the bridge between architecture and resonance, between shape and sound, calling the listener deeper into the living equation of the ancient world. Night unfurls across the plateau again, cloaking the limestone in blue shadow. The wind is cooler now, carrying the scent of distant fields and the faint metallic tang of the river. Inside the Great Pyramid, the temperature holds steady, indifferent to the world outside. The passageways breathe a still, heavy air, dry enough to mummify time itself. Torches flicker along the narrow corridors, their flames bending as though in obedience to unseen currents. And then, deep within the heart of this mountain of stone, the path widens into a chamber that feels alive, the grand gallery leading toward the king's chamber, a cathedral within a tomb that was never a tomb. Step inside, and sound changes shape. A whisper becomes a note. A breath becomes vibration. The polished granite of the walls catches the faintest echo and sends it back magnified, layered, as if the chamber itself were answering. Those who have stood here in silence speak of a hum just beyond hearing, a pressure at the edge of perception. It is not the wind nor the pulse of the blood in the ear. It is something else, a resonance so pure it borders on presence. When struck, the granite sarcophagus emits a tone at 432 Hz, a pitch that recurs in sacred chants, Tibetan bowls, and the tuning systems of medieval cathedrals. The frequency is not arbitrary. It is the rhythm of the body at rest, the heartbeat of harmony. In this chamber, the tone lingers, cycling through overtones that seem to hang in midair. One does not merely hear it, one feels it behind the ribs, vibrating like memory. Modern acousticians who measured these frequencies in the late 20th century were baffled. The dimensions of the chamber, its height, width, and length, aligned to create standing waves that amplify specific tones while cancelling others. The effect is deliberate. Any deviation would destroy the harmony. It suggests that the builders knew how sound behaves within confined spaces, manipulating it with architectural precision. Yet there are no hieroglyphs explaining music here, no records of musicians, only perfect silence, carved with impossible intent. To the Templars, who viewed the cosmos as music made visible, such a room would have been sacred beyond measure. In their doctrine, sound was not merely a vibration, but a bridge between worlds, the audible form of geometry. They believed the universe itself began with tone, the word made manifest, and that certain harmonies could align the human soul with divine proportion. Their chapels were designed accordingly. Domes tuned to echo Gregorian notes, arches that prolonged a single chant until it faded into prayer. If any of them had entered this granite chamber, they would have recognized it instantly as an altar of resonance, a place where stone itself sang to the heavens. Archaeologists often label this room the king's chamber, though no king ever rested here. There are no carvings, no offerings, no trace of ritual except the architecture itself. Some suggest it served as a burial chamber emptied by looters, others that it was a ceremonial space for ascension rites. Yet its function, whatever it was, defies the simplicity of burial. The 5 granite beams above, stacked like the ribs of a giant instrument, absorb and reflect sound in complex interplay. When struck, they produce low frequencies that cause the chest to vibrate, the same frequencies used in modern meditation and infrasound therapy. In a sense, this room is both organ and womb, tuned to the frequencies of the planet's own heartbeat, the Schumann resonance hovering near 8 Hertz. Perhaps the pyramid is a machine not of labour, but of listening, built to magnify the inaudible. Some physicists have speculated that such architecture could create standing waves strong enough to influence matter, a hypothesis bordering on myth, yet supported by subtle evidence. When a group of researchers tested acoustic responses in 2018, they discovered energy amplification around specific frequencies corresponding to the cavity's dimensions. The pyramid behaved like a resonator, concentrating sound within its core. It is not a leap to imagine that ancient priests or engineers used those properties intentionally, perhaps to attune themselves to celestial rhythms, perhaps to heal, perhaps to commune with whatever they called divine. The Templars, centuries later, inherited echoes of such practice. Their rituals began with a single bell tone, struck before dawn, believed to open the ear of the heart. The resonance symbolized the connection between heaven's geometry and earth's matter. In their writings, they speak of harmonia mundi, the harmony of the world, and the stones that answer prayer. Oh, they would have walked through this chamber, not as tourists, but as students of a forgotten craft. Perhaps they understood that to master architecture is to master frequency, that walls, arches, and columns can become instruments through which creation continues to sing. The interplay of light and sound deepens the mystery. Archaeologists found traces of soot nowhere in the pyramid, even in the most remote passages. If torches were used, their smoke left no mark. Some suggest the builders illuminated the interior with reflective copper mirrors, but experiments show such systems lose brightness quickly. Another theory whispers of luminescence, that the granite, rich in quartz, produced faint light under vibration or pressure, a phenomenon known as piezoluminescence. When struck or resonated, quartz can emit photons, creating ghostly glows along the surface. If this is true, then the pyramid once lit itself from within, a cathedral of self-born radiance, Imagine the chamber alive with sound and light, the coffer humming, the walls shimmering softly like stars trapped in stone. In that vision, the boundary between science and myth dissolves. The structure becomes both instrument and ritual, translating cosmic vibration into earthly form. The ancient priests may have stood here chanting specific tones, each matched to the chamber's resonance, amplifying until the air itself shimmered. The Templar chroniclers, centuries later, describe similar ceremonies in underground crypts, where chants rose until the torches dimmed and the walls appeared to breathe. They called it singing the stones awake. Whether borrowed myth or inherited memory, the parallel feels too intimate to ignore. Orthodox scholars caution restraint. They remind us that extraordinary precision does not require mysticism, that resonance might be coincidence, acoustics the byproduct of engineering meant to relieve weight, not elevate spirit. Yet the coincidence repeats too elegantly. Every ratio, every line, every chamber fits into a symphony of proportion that seems deliberate beyond practicality. If the builders sought only stability, they achieved beauty by accident, a miracle in itself. But perhaps they sought something more, a way to build eternity, not as symbol, but as frequency. The Knight of Acre would have stood in this darkness and listened. The faint hum would rise beneath his armour, blending with the slow beat of his heart. He would close his eyes and think of the bell that called his order to prayer, its note trembling through stone cathedrals across Europe. The sound is the same, one from medieval steel, one from ancient granite. Both reach for heaven through vibration. In that shared music, centuries collapse. He feels himself part of a continuum. Builder, believer, listener, all tuned to the same chord of creation. Above him, unseen, the massive beams of granite absorb and release energy, a breath measured in frequencies instead of seconds. The air trembles once, then stills. The echo fades into silence, leaving only the pulse of existence itself. It is said that the pyramid has no sound when left untouched, yet those who have spent nights within swear that after long enough, the chamber begins to sing on its own, a low, endless tone that seems to rise from the bones of the earth. Whether it is wind, vibration, or the ghost of intention, no one can say. But to stand there in the dark, feeling that invisible music wrap around you, is to understand why men once believed stone could be sacred. The torches burn lower. The knight's hand grazes the coffer, feeling the tremor fade. He senses that this place was built not to entomb flesh, but to preserve sound, to store the resonance of creation for those who remember how to listen. As he turns toward the passage, the last echo follows like a benediction, the note stretching thin until it disappears into the hum of the desert night. Outside, the stars shimmer overhead, their light falling in silent rhythm, the same rhythm carved into the granite walls behind him. The music has ended, but its vibration lingers, leading him and the listener toward the next discovery, waiting in the cold glow of the stars above the desert's edge. The night sky stretches unbroken above the desert, a vault of obsidian dusted with fire. The Great Pyramid glows faintly in that darkness, as if it absorbs starlight and exhales mystery. Beneath its sharp silhouette, silence reigns, until the hum of modern machines intrudes, a reminder that even the most sacred riddles cannot escape the reach of science. It is the year 2015, and on the plateau stand not priests or knights, but physicists, engineers, and architects. They carry no torches, no compasses of brass, only sensors, cryogenic detectors, and devices that read the invisible traces of cosmic rays. The project is called Scan Pyramids, and its purpose is as audacious as the monument itself: to see inside the unseeable, to look through solid stone, as if through glass. Muon tomography, born from particle physics, uses high-energy cosmic particles that rain constantly upon the Earth. When these muons pass through dense matter, they lose energy, leaving measurable shadows in detectors placed within or behind the target. By mapping those shadows, scientists can reveal hidden voids, the unseen spaces where muons slip more freely. In this way, the pyramid becomes a canvas, and the cosmos itself becomes the brush. For months, detectors are installed within chambers and on scaffolds, quietly counting the passage of particles that began their journey in the hearts of distant stars. The data arrives slowly, a drip of numbers translated into light. At first, all appears as expected: solid mass where walls should be, void where galleries are known to exist. But then, an anomaly emerges. High above the Grand Gallery, beyond any mapped corridor, the detectors record an excess of muons, too many to be explained by chance. Something is there. A hollow the size of a small cathedral, 30 meters long at least. It lies where no chamber should, sealed and silent for millennia. They name it the Big Void, though some whisper older names. The Chamber of Air, the Hidden Sanctuary, the Breath of the Pyramid. The announcement stirs the world. For the first time in generations, the Great Pyramid yields a secret that is verifiable, measurable, utterly modern. The findings are published in Nature, confirmed by independent teams from France, Japan, and Egypt. Even skeptics concede the evidence is real, but the meaning, always the meaning, remains elusive. Is the void a structural feature, a weight relief cavity like those above the king's chamber? Or is it something else, a deliberate space for a purpose we no longer understand? The scientists refrain from speculation, but the silence between their words invites it. To the imagination, the void becomes an echo chamber of possibilities. Some see it as the long-sought burial room of Khufu, untouched and perfect, still holding its golden treasures. Others suspect a ritual corridor guiding energy or sound, perhaps a resonance cavity linked to the frequencies of the king's chamber below. The Templar manuscripts, when revisited under this new light, acquire eerie relevance. One fragment from the Codex Hierosolomitanus speaks of a hollow above the stair of the king, where the breath of heaven lies waiting. Another describes the chamber of silence, sealed lest the world wake too soon. Could these medieval mystics, inheritors of half-remembered Egyptian lore, have preserved a memory of something like this hidden room? Within the framework of physics, the void makes sense. Every great structure requires balance between mass and emptiness. Stability is born from both. Yet beyond the mathematics, the discovery carries the flavor of myth resurrected. The Templars believed that sacred architecture mirrored the body of the divine, that each chamber corresponded to an organ of creation. The heart must beat, the lungs must breathe. Perhaps the Big Void is precisely that, a lung of stone inhaling eternity. In their symbolic vocabulary, a sealed space above the central gallery would represent the unseen spirit animating the material world, matter below, essence above. The same dualism that shaped their cathedrals, with crypts sunk deep in earth and towers that rose toward heaven. When the detectors confirmed the void's dimensions, artists rendered it in glowing diagrams. A vast, elongated space, arching above the known galleries like a second heart. Engineers speculated about micro-drones and fiber optics, hoping to pierce the mystery without damage. Yet every proposal met hesitation. The Egyptian authorities, guardians of the pyramid's sanctity, forbade intrusion. The chamber remains untouched. It sleeps, untouched by air, the most perfectly preserved secret on Earth. At night, when the scanning equipment powers down, the scientists sit in the sand drinking tea, their laptops glowing faintly in the dark. One of them, a French physicist, whispers that he sometimes dreams of walking through the void. In his vision, the space is filled not with relics, but with light, thin and blue, as if the walls themselves exhale luminescence. He hears a tone, steady and low, matching the resonance of the king's chamber below. He wakes before reaching the far wall. When he tells the story to his colleagues, they laugh, but quietly. Something about the pyramid unsettles even the most rational hearts. The Knight of Acre would not have laughed. He would have recognized the scientist's dream as revelation. To him, every hidden chamber is a metaphor for the soul, sealed, invisible, yet alive with vibration. The muons that slip through stone would, in his language, be angels of matter, messengers from the cosmos tracing divine architecture. What modern physics calls particle flux, he would call grace. For him, the big void is not an accident, but a message that survived the ages precisely because it was unreadable until we learned to see with starlight. The Templars believed in preservation through concealment. Their most sacred treasures were hidden not in plain sight, but within the geometry of their churches. Angles, symbols, empty spaces that held meaning invisible to the uninitiated. Perhaps the builders of the pyramid followed the same law, that the truest truths must be buried within stone, waiting for the right kind of vision to uncover them. The discovery of the big void, then, is less an archaeological event than a continuation of that ancient pact between secrecy and revelation. The universe itself seems to conspire in its timing. Cosmic particles born billions of years ago now drawing a map through limestone to tell us that we have not yet reached the heart of the mystery. Skeptics, of course, object. They warn against mythologizing science, against reading poetry into probability. To them, the void is a structural necessity, nothing more. But even they cannot ignore the symmetry of the moment. After thousands of years, technology has revealed what intuition always suspected, that the pyramid is not solid, but alive. It's silence, not emptiness, but breath. In that sense, science has done what mysticism always promised. It has made the invisible visible. Beneath the stars, the detectors continue their vigil. Each moon that passes is another letter in a message written by the cosmos, spelling out a language too vast for translation. The pyramid glows faintly under the moon, its edges dissolving into haze. One can almost imagine the hidden chamber pulsing with that same lunar rhythm, expanding and contracting like a heart asleep. The physicists finish their tea and fall silent, listening to the wind move over the plateau. Somewhere in that whisper, the Templar's bell seems to toll again, its note woven with the sigh of the desert, the hum of distant machinery, the heartbeat of a monument that refuses to die. As dawn begins to pale the horizon, the instruments tick steadily, counting the fall of particles older than humanity. Within the stone, the void waits, patient and unseen. Whether it is a structural cavity or a sanctuary for eternity matters little now. Its existence changes everything, reminding us that even when we think we know the shape of the past continues to expand within us. The Great Pyramid breathes again, inhaling the dust of stars, exhaling questions. And as the first rays of sunlight graze its peak, the knight's imagined shadow merges with that of the scientists, bridging centuries in a single gesture of wonder. The silence that follows feels holy, as if both faith and reason have paused together to listen to the sound of the universe, knocking softly on a door of stone that has not opened in 45 centuries. Dawn in northern France comes slow, a grey veil creeping over fields glazed with dew. In that tender hush before the bells ring for prime, mist gathers around an old church where vines climb its stones like veins. Beneath those roots once ran a lineage, royal, fragile, half mythical. The Merovingians, they called them, the long-haired kings. Their hair was more than ornament. It was a symbol of divine inheritance. To cut it was treason. To bind it was sacrilege. They ruled the early Frankish realms between Rome's ashes and Europe's awakening. From the 5th to the 8th century, their name derived from Merovec, the sea-born ancestor, said to have been conceived between a queen and a creature from beyond the waves. The chronicles, half history and half legend, describe a dynasty both barbaric and blessed, bearing the blood of gods. To the Templars, who rose centuries later, the Merovingians were more than ancient monarchs. They were a key. The order's archives spoke of a royal bloodline entrusted with a secret that could unmake or renew Christendom. The connection was whispered in monasteries and buried under layers of code. Sang Real, the royal blood, which later ages would reimagine as the Holy Grail. But before it became myth, it was genealogy, a thread of continuity that ran through kings and mystics, priests and heretics, and according to some, through the very heart of the Templar story. The chroniclers of Saint-Denis wrote that the Merovingian kings were sacred not by anointing, but by nature. Their power flowed from the blood itself, a divine current predating the church. They healed by touch, commanded loyalty by presence, and claimed descent from the line of David, through Joseph of Arimathea, or through Mary Magdalene, depending on which heretic you asked. They ruled with an air of sanctity that unnerved bishops and popes alike. When Dagobert II, the last true Merovingian, defied the papacy and sought to reform his kingdom in the 7th century, he was murdered in exile, an arrow through the eye. The crown passed to the mayors of the palace, the Carolingians, who would father Charlemagne and recast the divine right of kings into the language of empire. The long-haired kings faded into legend, but whispers of their survival lingered in monastic margins, where monks copied stories they dared not believe. Centuries later, when the Templars returned from the East laden with relics and documents, they also gathered fragments of those old whispers. Within the abbey of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, patron of their order, rumours began to circulate that the knights had found genealogies tracing the Merovingian line, far beyond its supposed extinction. Some claimed they possessed parchments proving that Dagobert's heirs had lived, sheltered by sympathetic monastic orders in southern Gaul. Others spoke of hidden families preserving symbols of the fleur-de-lis, not as a sign of monarchy, but as a cipher for lineage. Whether true or not, such rumours drew the scrutiny of church and crown. The idea of a sacred bloodline surviving outside papal control was a heresy too dangerous to tolerate. Yet the Templars thrived, their influence spreading across Europe. Perhaps it was not gold or relics that secured their power, but knowledge, ancestral, political, or divine. The Merovingians themselves were steeped in symbols that resonated with older worlds. Their tombs bore carvings of bees and serpents, emblems of resurrection and hidden wisdom. When Napoleon later adopted the bee as his imperial emblem, some believed he sought to inherit that ancient sanctity, the charisma of sacred kingship. The Templars, for their part, used similar symbols in their seals and architecture. 2 knights on one horse, the circle enclosing a cross, the 8-pointed star. Each was a code of duality, of unity born from opposites. In their theology, spirit and flesh were not enemies, but mirrors. The divine could manifest through lineage as easily as through revelation. To them, a sacred bloodline was not superstition, it was a living sacrament. In the shadow of these ideas, a curious manuscript surfaced in the 20th century. The Dossier du Prieuré de Sion, filed within the French National Library. It spoke of a secret brotherhood founded in the 12th century, preserving the bloodline of the Merovingians and intertwined with the rise of the Knights Templar. Many historians dismiss it as a forgery, crafted by modern hands seeking mystique, yet within its pages are details difficult to invent, accurate heraldic symbols, burial sites later confirmed by archaeology, and references to abbots and counts obscure even to scholars. Fact and fiction blur, as they always do when secrets hide behind faith. Perhaps the document's power lies not in its truth, but in its persistence, the way it refuses to die, much like the legend it guards. For the Templars, the notion of an unbroken bloodline served both as theology and mission. If divine wisdom could travel through stone, as they believed it did through the Great Pyramid, it could also travel through flesh. They saw the human body as architecture, a vessel of sacred proportion, designed to house light. A lineage carrying that design unaltered would be, to them, the living counterpart of the temple itself. Protecting such a line would mean protecting the bridge between heaven and earth. The Grail, then, was not a cup, but a continuity, an inheritance of form and essence. The Merovingians, whether they knew it or not, had become the myth's beating heart. In a monastery library outside Troy, a Templar chronicler named Guillaume de Montbard left a cryptic note: "The seed sleeps under the mountain, guarded by those who remember." Some interpret this as reference to relics buried in the Pyrenees. Others, to a family line concealed among minor nobles. Whatever the meaning, the phrase became emblematic of the order's secret creed, that divine inheritance, once buried, must one day rise again. The same belief that once guided their defense of Jerusalem's temple now guided their preservation of bloodlines and symbols scattered across Europe. Modern historians, armed with skepticism, see political allegory in all this. To them, the Templars may have aligned themselves with Merovingian law to legitimize their independence from both church and king. By invoking a lineage older than papal authority, they positioned themselves as custodians of a purer faith. Yet even that pragmatic reading carries a shadow of awe. Myth, after all, has power because it speaks in the language of need. The Middle Ages hungered for legitimacy, for connection to an unbroken past. The Merovingians supplied that hunger, and the Templars, ever shrewd, fed it. But beyond politics and doctrine lies the quiet pulse of something more intimate, the human yearning to belong to a story larger than oneself. The Knight of Acre, in his long watch across centuries, would recognize that yearning. He would walk through a French forest thick with mist, hearing the distant bells, and think of that ancient bloodline as a river running beneath the soil. He would imagine it flowing from the deserts of Egypt, through the veins of kings, through the hands of builders and scholars, finally to his own order sworn to secrecy. In that continuity, he would find comfort, that the mysteries he guarded were not isolated stones, but parts of a living chain. The fog lifts, sunlight touches the church's spire, and for a moment the glass catches it, scattering colours across the nave. The bees carved on the older tomb glow briefly, their wings glinting like gold. Somewhere beyond sight, the river hums under the earth, carrying the reflection of the morning sky. Perhaps the long-haired kings still sleep in that current, their legacy braided with myth and truth alike. And perhaps, beneath the cathedral floors and Templar vaults, the memory of that blood still flows, an invisible geometry of lineage, as sacred and elusive as the mathematics written in the stones of Giza. The knight bows his head as if hearing a distant bell, not of metal, but of memory, ringing across ages to remind him that every secret of blood and stone carries the same pulse. The echo fades, leading us onward, to the order that would inherit their mission and bear its weight beneath the cross of the temple. Twilight seeps into the narrow streets of Jerusalem, painting the stones with a slow, molten light. The air is thick with the scent of olive smoke and dust. In the year 1119, a small band of knights kneel upon the worn flagstones of what had once been Solomon's temple. They are few, 9 men bound by vow, and their weapons gleam with the dull shine of resolve rather than pride. At their centre stands Hugues de Paillon, a man with eyes the colour of tempered steel. He raises his hand not in benediction, but in oath. Around them echoes the murmur of a city divided by faith, where crusaders, pilgrims, and traders crowd the alleys in uneasy truce. These men call themselves Pauperes Camilletones, Christi Templici Salomonici, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. History will shorten their name to the Knights Templar. Their charge, at first glance, seems simple: to protect pilgrims travelling the perilous roads between Jaffa and Jerusalem. Yet even in its founding, the order carries the scent of enigma. The Temple Mount, where they take residence, is no ordinary fortress. It stands above a labyrinth of ancient tunnels, chambers, and vaults. In their first decade, the knights dig with a fervour that belies their supposed poverty, delving beneath the foundations by torchlight. Chroniclers of the time mention wagons leaving the compound at night, their cargoes shrouded. Rumours spread that they have discovered something buried deep. Relics, scrolls, perhaps the fabled Ark itself. When they emerge years later, the order is no longer poor. Wealth flows toward them like an invisible tide. By papal decree, the Templars answer to no king, no bishop, no law but their own. Their command spans continents, from Jerusalem to Paris, from London to Acre. They become bankers, engineers, navigators, and diplomats. Their preceptories guard trade routes and knowledge alike. Gold passes through their hands, but what they value more is information. Maps, codes, secrets whispered in confession. They invent letters of credit that allow merchants to travel unarmed, a precursor to modern banking. Their coffers rival those of monarchs, and their secrecy rivals that of monks. A knight might die without ever knowing the true extent of his order's wealth, yet wealth was never their goal. To the Templars, finance was merely the means to sustain a greater mission, the preservation of sacred wisdom. Within their sealed archives, they guarded manuscripts recovered from the East, texts of alchemy, astronomy, and geometry long lost to Europe. Some claim they possessed fragments from the Library of Alexandria, carried across generations by Coptic monks. Others whisper of documents older still, inscribed on copper or clay, describing sciences indistinguishable from sorcery. Whatever their contents, these relics shaped the Templar worldview. They began to see themselves not just as soldiers of Christ, but as custodians of a truth too vast for doctrine. Their fortresses reflected this philosophy. Unlike the ornamented castles of feudal lords, Templar commanderies were austere, geometric, built upon ratios echoing the golden mean. Their circular churches mirrored the shape of the Holy Sepulchre and, deeper still, the geometry of the Great Pyramid. To the uninitiated, such designs seemed devotional. To those who knew the hidden canon, they were blueprints of the cosmos. Each wall, each arch, each column carried symbolic proportion, harmonizing with unseen frequencies of earth and sky. The knights prayed not only with words, but with measure, turning architecture into theology. Their motto, non nobis, domine, non nobis, sed nominitur gloriam, was carved upon lintels, but the geometry itself was the prayer. Their influence soon surpassed even the church's comfort. Kings borrowed money from them. Popes relied on their ships. They negotiated truces and wars with equal fluency. Yet the higher they climbed, the deeper their secrecy grew. The order divided its knowledge between exoteric and esoteric levels, the outer brotherhood of knights and an inner circle of masters who studied mysteries forbidden elsewhere. Initiates of the higher grades learned symbols linking the Temple of Solomon to structures far older, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt. They were taught that the earth was a temple itself, its latitudes and longitudes aligning with celestial harmonies. To build in accordance with these lines was to participate in divine architecture. Their rituals, often misrepresented by later inquisitors, were solemn rather than heretical. At initiation, the novice renounced all possessions and knelt before a black and white flag, the Beauséant, symbol of unity through duality. He swore obedience, poverty, and secrecy. Then, in a dim hall lit by oil lamps, he was asked a final question, whether he sought the Holy Sepulchre or the Holy Wisdom. Those who answered wisdom were led deeper into the order's mysteries. To them, Christ was not only Saviour, but architect. The temple not only building, but body. They learned that faith without understanding is blind, and that the universe itself is written in number. Centuries later, their enemies would twist those teachings into accusations. They would be charged with idolatry, with worshipping a head carved in alabaster, with denying the cross. In truth, the head was likely a relic, a representation of divine knowledge, the caput philosophorum, symbol of illumination. The Church saw blasphemy where the Templars saw symbolism. Their dual devotion to Christ and to the hidden science of creation threatened both throne and altar. But long before their downfall, they foresaw it. Records suggest that in the decades before their persecution, they began transferring archives and treasure to remote commanderies in Scotland, Portugal, and Cyprus. Ships vanished from ports overnight, carrying chests said to contain not gold, but parchment. Among those rumoured documents were genealogies tracing the line of the Merovingians, the long-haired kings believed to embody the holy blood. The Templars, convinced that lineage and wisdom were twin vessels of divinity, protected both with equal fervour. In their coded letters, wine referred to knowledge, vineyard to the bloodline. When their order was dissolved, that vineyard scattered, but its seeds endured. In France, in Scotland, in secret fraternities, echoes of the Templar ideal took root. Their legacy became the skeleton of future esoteric orders, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, each claiming descent from those who once guarded the temple. The Knight of Acre, centuries ahead of this reckoning, could not yet foresee the flames of Friday, October 13th, 1307, when the order would fall. But he would feel it in the tremor beneath his vows, the premonition of betrayal. For now, he walks through the corridors of the Jerusalem temple, hearing the wind move through ancient stones. He knows their task is greater than protecting pilgrims. He senses that what they found beneath these floors, the relics, the scrolls, the whispers of forgotten civilizations, will change the shape of faith itself. The torchlight glints against the walls, revealing faint carvings of triangles within circles, a geometry he has seen only once before in the fragment of stone carried from Giza. The pattern repeats. The motif returns. It is the same song in another key. Outside, night descends fully, the city's lamps flickering like scattered stars. The knights gather for prayer, their voices low, merging with the wind. The words rise and fall in measured cadence, neither chant nor speech, but something in between, a rhythm that feels older than Latin, older than scripture. Perhaps it is the same resonance that once vibrated within the granite of the pyramids. Perhaps their order has merely rediscovered what the ancients knew, that sound, number, and devotion are threads of the same loom. The knight lifts his gaze toward the sky. where Orion hangs over the horizon. The same constellation mirrored in the three great pyramids far to the west. The stars shine, the pattern endures. He whispers the order's motto, non nobis, domine, and feels its meaning ripple through him. Not for us, O Lord, but for the pattern you left in stone and blood alike. In that moment, the lines between Egypt and Jerusalem, between pyramid and temple, collapse into one vast design. The air cools, the torches sputter, and in the darkness that follows, the vow of the Templars takes on its truest meaning: to guard what endures when empires fall, to keep the bridge between heaven and earth intact. The wind moves through the corridors like a long breath, carrying the promise forward, toward the inevitable storm of their destiny and the echo of their ruin yet to come. Dawn breaks over Jerusalem with a slow pulse of light, spilling across domes and spires until it rests upon the broad plateau of the Temple Mount. The call to prayer rises from the east like a ribbon of smoke, carried by the wind that has moved over these stones for 3,000 years. Beneath the cries of muezzins and the tolling of distant bells lies an older silence, one that remembers every faith that has laid claim to this hill. Here Solomon built his temple of cedar and gold. Here Herod raised marble upon marble. And here, after centuries of conquest, the Knights Templar pitched their banners. They believed this ground was the navel of the world, the meeting point of heaven and earth, the heart of sacred geometry itself. The year is 1128. Morning light glints on the polished helms of the Templars guarding the entrance to their quarters, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they call the Templum Salomonis. Inside, the air is cool, filled with the scent of dust and oil lamps. Beneath the flagstones runs a honeycomb of tunnels, carved in ages unknown, descending toward foundations that predate every scroll in the city. For years, the Templars have tunneled here under the guise of restoration, though their true purpose remains cloaked in secrecy. Chroniclers record nights when wagons left the compound in silence, their cargoes sealed beneath linen. Some claim they unearthed the lost treasure of Solomon. Others, that they discovered relics whose power could shatter kingdoms. Whatever they found, the order's wealth and influence multiplied soon after, as though gold had risen straight from the rock. Among the most persistent legends is that they discovered the Ark of the Covenant, the chest of acacia wood overlaid with gold, said to hold the stone tablets of divine law. The Bible describes the Ark as a vessel of terrible energy, a device that struck men dead for touching it unbidden, that leveled walls with invisible fire. To possess it would be to command not only faith, but physics, a relic bridging myth and matter. Yet no chronicler within the order ever names it directly. In their codes and letters, the word arca appears beside symbols of rays and wings, but always shrouded by allegory. Perhaps the ark was not an object at all, but a metaphor, a container for wisdom or for something more elusive, power bound by knowledge. One fragment from the so-called Cartulary of Aragon speaks of a box of light hidden under the stair of Solomon, that none but the elect may bear. Later commentators assume this was poetic hyperbole, yet the phrasing evokes something tangible, as if describing technology misunderstood. Medieval writers could only frame marvels through theology. They had no vocabulary for electricity or radiation. The ark that shone like lightning may have been a device that harnessed natural force, a machine disguised as miracle. Such speculation blurs the line between piety and science. But for the Templars, those boundaries were already blurred. They sought not to debunk faith, but to decode it, to find in divine symbols the fingerprints of universal law. Their fascination with the Temple Mount went deeper than relics. The structure's dimensions, described in the Book of Kings, follow precise mathematical ratios, multiples of sacred numbers echoing those of the Great Pyramid. The outer court's perimeter aligns with solar azimuths. The Holy of Holies forms a perfect cube, its geometry resonant with harmonic principles. The Templars believed Solomon's masons had inherited this wisdom from even older sources, perhaps from Egypt itself. When they excavated beneath the mount, they were not merely treasure hunting. They were tracing a lineage of architecture, a bridge from the pyramid builders to themselves. Their title, Knights of the Temple, thus became more than geographical. It was philosophical. They were guardians of the blueprint that binds heaven and stone. The legend of the Ark fused with that of the Holy Grail until the two were indistinguishable. Both were vessels of divine presence. Both promised transcendence to those deemed worthy. In Templar symbolism, the Ark was often represented as a chalice flanked by wings, while the Grail appeared as a radiant cube, a reversal of forms hinting that one was the shadow of the other. Some secret texts even suggest that the Grail's power was not in blood, but in vibration, the same resonance the Templars studied in the pyramid's granite. To them, the sacred container, whether cup, chest, or chamber, was the same archetype, matter-shaped to hold the infinite. Stories spread quickly through the Crusader states. Pilgrims swore they saw strange lights above the Temple Mount at night, shafts of brightness like silent lightning rising from the ground. Muslim chroniclers, too, wrote of the Franks' peculiar rites, that they prayed in circles, that they chanted in languages not their own. One Arabic historian described their voices as metal humming, like the ringing of the firmament. Perhaps, as with the king's chamber, they had found the frequencies that awakened stone. Perhaps the Ark, or whatever slept beneath the mount, was a resonator as much as a relic. By 1130, their control of the site was absolute. The Al-Aqsa complex became both monastery and laboratory. Within its walls, scribes copied diagrams of geometry. Physicians studied herbal and alchemical texts from the East, and engineers experimented with hydraulics and optics. The Order's archives speak of a mirror that burns without flame and a lamp that draws light from the air itself. Most of these inventions vanished with time, dismissed as fables, yet some resurfaced centuries later among the manuscripts of early scientists who claim Templar descent. Their obsession with illumination, literal and spiritual, was no coincidence. Light, to them, was the visible form of truth, but power breeds suspicion. Rumours of forbidden knowledge spread through Christendom. The clergy accused them of studying Jewish mysticism, of reading the Sefer Yetzirah and invoking names of angels to animate stone. The knights answered only with silence. They knew that revelation cannot be taught to those who fear it. Even among their own, few understood what was truly buried beneath the temple. One chronicler, writing decades later in a ciphered Latin, hinted that the Ark was never removed at all, that it remains where the knights found it, sealed behind a wall no conqueror has ever breached. He wrote, "When the time comes, the box shall open itself, for it is the world's heart." The Knight of Acre, if he stood there that morning, would have seen the city awakening in layers of gold and shadow. He would have felt the weight of the mount under his boots and known that this was not just soil, but scripture turned to stone. The same geometry that governed the Great Pyramid governed this hill. The same harmony that sang in Giza's granite whispered here beneath Jerusalem's earth. He might have wondered whether the Ark, if it still existed, was meant to be found at all, or whether its purpose was to draw the seekers together, century after century, in pursuit of the same unreachable light. As the sun climbed higher, casting long spears of brightness across the courtyard, the knight would kneel beside the entrance of the tunnels. He would touch the warm stone, tracing the ancient carvings of lilies and stars. For a moment, he might hear the echo of distant bells from across the sea. the memory of his brothers labouring under European cathedrals, each one a reflection of this temple. The wind carries dust and prayer alike. The scent of earth mingles with incense. Somewhere below, hidden chambers still breathe their silence. The knight closes his eyes and imagines the ark, not as a relic of wrath, but as a heart of pure resonance, a vessel humming softly with the frequency of creation itself. When he rises, the light of noon blinds him. The mount shimmers, its stones dazzling white. The noise of the city returns, merchants shouting, camels braying, the world rushing back. Yet beneath that ordinary clamour, something endures, a hum beneath the heartbeat, a pulse beneath the prayer. Whether it is the echo of God, of geometry, or of the ancient machines that once sang here, no one can say. The Templars will guard it for 2 centuries more, until fire and betrayal consume them. But for now, as the sun stands at zenith, the Temple Mount glows like a mirror of heaven, and the secret sleeps once again beneath its stones, waiting for those who can hear in silence the music of what was never meant to die. Rain falls gently over Paris, the kind of fine, unhurried drizzle that mutes the city's noise and makes the Seine glimmer like melted lead. It is October 1307, the dawn of the 13th. The sky, heavy and low, mirrors the weight pressing on the hearts of men who once called themselves invincible. Within the damp corridors of the temple, an imposing fortress of stone rising behind thick walls, the Knights Templar kneel in uneasy prayer. Outside, the agents of King Philip IV gather, their armour dull, their orders sealed. In hours, the greatest brotherhood of the Middle Ages will be shattered, accused of blasphemy, heresy, and conspiracy against the Church. Yet beneath the thunder of betrayal lies another story, one that runs deeper than politics, the old question of blood and truth, of how myth becomes accusation and how faith becomes forbidden. The king's men burst through the gates at dawn. By nightfall, hundreds of knights are bound in chains. The air in their dungeons smells of sweat, damp straw, and fear. Some whisper prayers, others murmur fragments of the old invocations, the ones taught only to initiates. The interrogators call them idolaters, accusing them of worshipping a bearded head called Baphomet, of spitting on the cross, of adoring the devil disguised as a cat or woman. None of these charges match the order's known liturgy. Yet under torture, men say what pain commands. Confessions multiply, contradictions pile like bodies. The Inquisition's scribes, cloaked in sanctity, record each word as gospel. The Templar legend fractures into mirrors, each reflecting a different fear of the age. Beneath the grotesque theatre of heresy, however, flickers a more dangerous suspicion, one that kings and popes dare not name aloud. The Templars, some believe, hold genealogies proving the survival of a holy bloodline, descendants of the union between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, preserved through the Merovingian kings and hidden in plain sight under their guardianship. To destroy the order is to silence that possibility, to protect the Church from its most perilous rival, the notion that divinity could travel through flesh rather than decree. For if Christ's blood flows through living heirs, the foundations of papal authority would crumble. The Templars' wealth could be seized, but it is this rumour, the heresy of the Grail, that seals their doom. The idea of a sacred lineage was not new. It had echoed through Gnostic sects, Coptic manuscripts, and whispers from the East. The Templars, steeped in esoteric knowledge gathered from their excavations beneath the Temple Mount, understood the power of symbols and myths. To them, blood was never merely physical. It was a metaphor for continuity, for wisdom inherited rather than taught. In their secret teachings, the Grail represented both vessel and vessel-bearer, the fusion of matter and meaning. Yet when inquisitors pried, They interpreted every metaphor literally. A cup became a scandal. A woman became a threat. Knowledge became witchcraft. Thus began one of history's most efficient distortions, the transformation of mystery into sin. Through the fog of centuries, fragments of their defense survive. In one testimony, a knight insists the idol they adored was the severed head of John the Baptist, symbol of prophecy reborn. Another claims it was merely a reliquary, a sacred skull representing wisdom preserved beyond death. Both explanations dissolve under scrutiny, yet both hint at something older, the veneration of lineage, of continuity through sacrifice. The Templars may have seen in the Baptist not a rival to Christ, but his forerunner, the keeper of the bridge between flesh and spirit. To worship that head was to honour the chain of transmission, the same chain that linked the Merovingians to their mythic ancestor. When Philip's agents dragged Grand Master Jacques de Molay to trial, the king demanded he reveal the order's secrets, the location of their treasure, the nature of their idol, the truth of their allegiance. De Molay, weary but unbroken, refused. Tortured for weeks, he confessed only enough to halt the flames that waited. Then, on the banks of the Seine 7 years later, he retracted it all. Bound to a stake, his voice rang steady through smoke and rain. God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. Soon he will judge those who have condemned us. Legend says that as the fire consumed him, he called down a curse upon the king and the pope, summoning both before God within the year. And indeed, within 12 months, both were dead. The river carried their ashes downstream, mingling royal and papal dust with that of the knights they condemned. In that conflagration, myth and fact fused irrevocably. The Templars' archives vanished, their symbols scattered into the hands of secret societies. Yet their legend refused to die. Within decades, tales spread of Templars escaping to Scotland and Portugal, merging with local brotherhoods that would evolve into Freemasonry. Their rituals preserved fragments of the old knowledge, geometry, sacred proportion, the unity of opposites. Their catechisms spoke obliquely of a hidden bloodline, the living stone, and a grail that was not a cup, but a principle of inheritance. The Church, wary of resurrecting old ghosts, ignored these whispers, but the lineage, whether literal or metaphorical, continued its quiet march through generations of mystics and scholars who claimed descent not by birth, but by understanding. Centuries later, historians would attempt to peel away the legend to locate the real Templars beneath the varnish of romance. Some succeeded in clarifying their administrative genius, their proto-banking system, their political naivety, but none could explain how an order of warrior monks became the axis of every European mystery. The answer, perhaps, lies not in their actions, but in their absence. When truth is burned, imagination becomes its heir. The vacuum left by their destruction demanded mythology to fill it. The bloodline theory, the Grail, the Ark, the Pyramid, all converged into one vast narrative, the unending human hunger to trace divinity in the veins of history. The Church's response over time softened. Modern Vatican scholars acknowledge the trials as miscarriages of justice, products of greed and paranoia. Yet the deeper reconciliation between faith and the possibility of inherited sanctity remains unspoken. The idea that the divine might dwell not only in heaven, but in heredity still unsettles dogma. It suggests that holiness could be empirical, that salvation might pass through DNA as much as doctrine. Whether the Templars believed this literally or symbolically no longer matters. Their persecution marked the triumph of orthodoxy over curiosity, of control over wonder. For the Knight of Acre, who lived centuries before the fall, this ending would feel like a prophecy fulfilled. He would see it not as tragedy, but as metamorphosis. In his vision, the Order's dissolution was merely another concealment, the seed going to ground so that new roots might take hold. He would imagine future generations decoding the symbols they left behind, rediscovering the bridge they once guarded between matter and spirit. The bloodline to him was not royal but universal, the shared pulse of those who seek truth regardless of creed. Outside, the rain thickens. The Seine swells against its banks, carrying the reflections of torchlight and stone. The city does not yet know that a legend is dying and being born in the same hour. On the scaffold, Demolay's voice fades into the hiss of rain, his words carried by wind toward the river that runs like a vein through Paris. Somewhere far away, beneath cathedrals patterned after the Temple Mount and pyramids unseen, the echo of his vow stirs the silence of buried halls. The old knowledge sleeps, but not forever. As the flames dim, the sky breaks open, a brief clearing through which stars flicker like eyes watching from another age. For a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. Then the bell of Notre Dame tolls, deep and mournful, each note a reminder that power passes, but pattern remains. The Order is gone, yet its resonance endures, in symbols carved on stone, in stories whispered between masons, in the quiet conviction that every truth, no matter how buried, will one day rise again. The river carries the ashes downstream, silver in the moonlight, toward the sea that once cradled Merovec's mythic birth. Thus, the circle closes, not with certainty, but with continuity. A legacy that refuses to drown. The desert returns at dusk, quiet and immeasurable, as though the whole world has exhaled. The horizon glows with the faint residue of day, and the wind moves slowly through the ruins of stone, like the breath of something ancient stirring in sleep. At the edge of the plateau, the Great Pyramid rises once more from the sands, eternal and unchanged, its shadow stretching across time. Above it, Orion kindles into life, the same constellation that has watched humanity build, fight, worship, and dream. In this hour between day and darkness, the story circles back to where it began. The meeting of faith and geometry, of iron and sand, of the Templar's bell and the whisper of an age older than kings. All across history, the fragments align. The Templars, now ghosts in armour, stand beside the architects of Giza, their silhouettes blending in the half-light. Both orders, separated by millennia, bowed before the same mystery, the pursuit of order hidden within chaos. One carved stone into equations, the other forged belief into symbol. Their tools differed, yet their hands moved to the same rhythm, the geometry of devotion. Beneath the red cross and beneath the desert sun, both sought the eternal measure, the balance between weight and wonder. And as the centuries folded, their stories intertwined until no one could say where myth ended and memory began. The Great Pyramid gleams in the moonlight like a sleeping instrument. Within its sealed chambers, the air remains untouched, cold, and mineral, carrying echoes of frequencies long faded. The Muons still fall, one by one, their invisible rain charting the contours of void and stone. Somewhere above the Grand Gallery, that hollow chamber discovered by modern science rests untouched, its silence as deliberate as prayer. The engineers call it a structural void. The mystics call it a sanctuary. Yet perhaps it is both, a reminder that emptiness is not absence, but possibility. Every age has filled that emptiness with its own reflection. The Pharaoh saw a tomb for eternity. The Templar saw a cipher of the divine. The scientist sees an equation awaiting proof. Each is right, and none are complete. The wind carries the faint toll of a bell, imagined, perhaps, or real, its sound rolling over dunes that have swallowed empires. It is the echo of vows kept and broken, of truths guarded and lost. In that sound, the lines between epochs blur. A Templar knight stands once more on the sand, his armour dulled by dust, his cloak fluttering like a banner caught between time and wind. He looks to the pyramid's summit and sees not conquest, but reflection. The proof that all monuments are mirrors. The world is what we build to remember and what we build to forget. The stones do not care whom they serve. They remember everyone. He kneels and presses his palm against the ground. Beneath his hand, the earth hums faintly, a vibration too deep for ears but not for the heart. It is the same pulse he once felt within the king's chamber, the same rhythm that stirred beneath the temple mount, the same breath he hears now in the shifting sands. The universe, it seems, speaks one continuous language, resonance, and we, the temporary listeners, are its fleeting translators. The pyramid, the cathedral, the chalice, the blood, they are all variations of the same chord, played across centuries in stone, flesh, and sound. Above him, the stars deepen. Orion climbs. Sirius glitters along its eternal path. And for a moment the sky and the desert become indistinguishable. A reflection meeting its source. He recalls the stories told by his order. How the ancients built to mirror heaven. How every stone was set to correspond with the path of the soul. The Great Pyramid, aligned so perfectly to the cardinal points, becomes a compass for memory itself. Its ratios, its precision, its hidden chambers, each an equation seeking resolution. Yet the answer lies not in numbers, but in silence. The purpose of mystery is not to be solved, but to be sustained. The knight closes his eyes. Behind the lids, images flicker like lanterns in wind. The red paint of Vice's cartouches, the rain scars on the Sphinx, the fragment of cedar older than empires, the glowing diagrams of the Muon scans, every discovery, every contradiction, every fragment of doubt. They are not obstacles, but notes within a greater melody. To question is to listen. The Templars understood that. So did the builders of Giza. Even the scientists tracing muons across millennia understand it now. Truth is not a monument, but an echo. It grows stronger each time it is spoken and fades only when silence forgets its shape. A soft tremor runs through the sand. The wind changes direction. Far across the plain, the Nile reflects the moon like liquid silver. Time itself seems to slow, the stars pulsing in quiet rhythm with the earth's hidden heart. The knight rises, his shadow long and slender against the pyramid's face. He knows the order is gone, the parchments lost, the relics scattered, yet their vow endures in every hand that measures, in every mind that wonders, in every heart that listens. Non nobis Domine, not for us, O Lord, but for the name that remains unspoken. The bell's echo fades into the hiss of sand, but its rhythm lingers, soft as breath. If the Great Pyramid truly is a message, it is not written for one people or one faith. It speaks to all who look upward and feel the vertigo of infinity. It teaches that knowledge must be built, not owned, that light, like truth, is refracted through many lenses before reaching the eye. The Templars guarded their secret, believing it would preserve unity. Perhaps they misunderstood. Perhaps the secret was never a single revelation, but the courage to keep asking. The pyramid, older than memory, keeps that question alive through its sheer defiance of time. It does not explain. It endures. The desert cools. Stars thicken in the sky, until it seems the air itself is made of silver dust. The knight walks toward the pyramid's base, his footsteps leaving shallow marks that the wind will soon erase. He pauses at the first block, its surface cold and smooth beneath his fingertips. The limestone glows softly, reflecting the constellations above. For a moment, he sees them inverted, the heavens carved upon the earth shining back. In that reflection, he recognizes what his order had always sought. Not dominion, but connection. The same geometry that governs the stars governs the soul. The bridge between heaven and earth was never lost. It simply changed its shape. He whispers a prayer that is also a farewell. The words dissolve into the air, mingling with the hush of the dunes. The pyramid stands silent, eternal, its edges etched against the rising moon. Somewhere within, in chambers untouched by light, the hidden void rests, a breath held since creation. The knight turns away, his form dissolving into distance, his path lit only by starlight. The bell tolls one last time, faint and far, its resonance carried across the desert, across centuries, until it becomes indistinguishable from the heartbeat of the world itself. Now the night deepens. The sands cool to shadow. The wind hums low and even. A lullaby for the stones. The great pyramid glows softly beneath the moon's pale eye. A monument not of death, but of continuity. And as the sound of the bell fades into nothing, a silence takes its place. Not empty, but full, like the pause between heartbeats. Within that silence, the desert breathes. Within that breath, the story rests. The stars shimmer, the earth turns, and everything that was once hidden returns gently to sleep. Good night, traveller of ages. Let the sound of the wind be your prayer, and may the echoes of the old world guide you into dream.